Hey guys, and welcome to Ben Swann Live. I'm Ben Swann. We've been trying to get together and do these live events with you, live conversations. We actually started it a few weeks ago, trying to cover the Epstein files. There's so much news, so much to talk about every day, so much breaking constantly. And rather than just trying to put out pre-recorded videos, we said, well, let's bring on some guests, let's have some longer conversations. And then, over the weekend, as you well know by now, President Trump essentially declared war on Iran. Now, of course, the administration is not calling it that. We're going to talk about that tonight. But a war was declared. Israel, the United States against Iran. And we've watched 3 days, and already this thing seems to be in many ways spinning out of control. Certainly in ways that the administration does not seem prepared for. A lot of hate's going to come my way for saying that. I understand. You can bring it. I can handle that heat. A lot of you are going to watch this and say, no, trust the plan. You got to believe this. No, Trump's playing 4D chess. Trump promised there would be no war with Iran. He said it repeatedly, so many times on the campaign trail. Marjorie Taylor Greene's been tweeting all weekend long and rightly said, not only did Trump and Vance and Rubio and Gabbard and everybody else in this administration, but everybody they brought in to sit and to campaign with them and to stand up on that stage. And it was the peace ticket, it was the pro-peace ticket, it was the no more war ticket. And here we are. Here we are, less than halfway through this term, and we've got another Middle East war, another regime change war. And there's a lot to talk about. What it looks like, how it's all happening, even the fact that they won't call it a regime change war. In fact, before we get to our guests, I want to play a soundbite for you. Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War, this morning got up and was being asked questions, and he said, this is not a regime change war, but we did change the regime, or the regime was changed. Listen to what he said.
Turns out the regime who chanted death to America and death to Israel was gifted death from America and death from Israel.
Yeah. He goes on to say, this is not a regime change war. Anna Paulina Luna, the congresswoman from Florida, did an interview yesterday in which she said this is not a regime change war. Every surrogate for the administration and the administration themselves refused to call it that. If it's not, what is it? It's a military operation that results in killing the entire leadership of a country, but it's not a regime change war. Scott Horton is going to be our guest tonight. Scott, I want to bring you into the conversation. If you don't know Scott, you should. I can't believe you wouldn't. He's the author of many books, including Enough Already and Provoked. Scott, it's great to have you on. So much to talk about here and so much to dive into. And I want to start with that because it's driving me crazy today. The fact that the administration won't call it a regime change war. And I'm assuming it's because throughout the campaign and on the campaign trail, regime change war became this dirty phrase that they were using to beat up the Bush administration rightly, to beat up the Obama administration rightly, to go after Biden, to go after Harris, saying that we're tired of regime change wars. It was probably the biggest phrase that kind of rallied people into MAGA. And of course, now we've seen that Trump has led his own, and he's, by the way, conducted multiple regime changes since he's been president. But this one's a little different. It's another Middle East war, and it's just like all the others. How do you see it?
Yeah, well, it's funny, if you think back to Iraq War II, the plan was originally, depending on who you asked, I guess, but the plan was to go in there and get rid of Saddam Hussein and essentially replace him, as Greg Palast said back then, with the next mustache in line, right? The next Ba'athist general to be military dictator. And instead they didn't do that. They did the Wolfowitz doctrine where they, this wasn't exactly, the Wolfowitz doctrine is something else, but it was Wolfowitz's plan to completely de-Ba'athify the government and abolish the army and start a civil war and fight on the Shiite side for 5 years and all this in a massive own goal, as they call it in soccer, right? And that horrible war. But then the thing is about it is now Iraq War II was such a catastrophe that now that's the benchmark for somehow anything less than an Iraq War II level full-scale invasion with the 3rd Infantry and 82nd Airborne and everybody rolling in there, the whole Marine Corps. Anything less than that is totally fine then. So we do a regime change war in Libya where we're back in bin Ladenites on the ground there. Same thing in Syria, as I know you well know, and confronted President Obama about in real time in 2012. Yeah, that's all fine. It's some dirty war. You hire some mercenaries. They do some suicide bombings and whatever. But hey, no American troops are getting killed. Same thing doing this horrific proxy war on Russia's border. But as they say over and over again, we're getting such a great bang for our buck, and no American soldiers are in harm's way. So it's totally fine to do.
Yeah.
And then now here we had, what do you call it in Venezuela? They didn't do the Wolfowitz plan and completely de-Baathify and kick every communist out of the government and destroy Maduro's army there, the Chavez army. They didn't do that. They went in there and they plucked the president and his wife out of there like a Afghan night raid. And then they left the vice president in charge. And the commie regime is still in charge, only now presumably more compliant with American goals. And so they get to live. But that's a regime change of a degree, obviously a huge one. And then, as predicted by me and many others, Donald Trump saw that and went, now he was then much easier to convince by Rubio and the others. See, you can do that. Now, they weren't going to reach out and abduct the Ayatollah, but as I put it in predicting this just over the last few weeks here, that, or after, post Venezuela, that, well, they're not going to go in there and pluck him out of there, but they could drop a 20,000-pound bomb on his head. They could put eyes on him. They can kill him. And that could be very appealing to Trump, that, see, you can do this. And with the military under your very special command, Mr. President, you can do what you want that the others were too afraid to do. And as Ben Shapiro put it with Venezuela, before this in Iran, with Venezuela, that we defeated Iraq syndrome, which was previously known as Vietnam syndrome, which was the mental illness of the American people, that they didn't want to give up their sons to die in these stupid wars anymore after Vietnam. And they said, George Bush Sr. himself said after Iraq War I, we beat the Vietnam syndrome. Now war is fun. Remember how easy Iraq War I was? Well, we've been at war in Iraq ever since then, 34 years and 35 years, and still going on, and now spreading back across the border again. Or we used to back Saddam against Iran. Remember that?
Yeah,
but
absolutely. But let me ask you this, because I first of all, you're exactly right. I believe when you say that the goal was, we're going to go and we're going to kill the Ayatollah, and it's going to be just like Venezuela, and it's going to be a couple-day operation. It's going to be similar to when we bombed the nuclear site last year, right? We're going to fly over, we're going to bomb it, we're going to leave, and then it's all going to be done, and then the people are going to move on. Sorry, guys, I didn't have to adjust the camera because I want to move around with too much ADHD. But the problem is that when that happens, Iran is not Venezuela, as you well know. Iran is also not Iraq 23 years ago. And there are a lot of people saying this, right? And I'm not just talking about people on the internet saying it. I know that, General Raisin Cain, as Trump likes to call him, apparently came out and said, this is not Iraq, right? This is very different. And you're misunderstanding the challenge that you're facing by going in there and trying to take out the Ayatollah, because, again, a country of over 90 million people, 3 times the size of Iraq, with ballistic missiles, with weaponry that Iraq did not have, with a leadership structure and a decentralized system that Iraq did not have. And of course, we also know they have a different view of their leadership there. So we get lulled into this lie that we're going to be greeted as liberators every freaking time, Scott. Like, they tell us the same thing. And then today, even now, right, flip through any of those major media networks, and they're going to tell you that no one is going to say the Iranian people are chanting death to America. They're not saying it. There's video of it all over the place. If you go on X, you can find tons of video of this. No one's even acknowledging it's happening. It's still like, oh no, the Iranian people hated their government and now they're finally have a chance to be free. They don't view it like that. And it may take us 20 years from now, we'll be talking about this, looking back on it and saying, yeah, well, that was another huge disaster.
Well, look, I mean, like a lot of societies, even, ethnically homogeneous ones, unlike Iran, people can still be very divided between right, left, and whatever. They held those No Kings rallies. Those were the biggest organized protests in American history. Yet they were meaningless. No one thought they were about to overthrow Donald Trump or the Constitution and replace with some new regime or any kind of thing like that. So are liberals in Tehran very happy to see the death of the Ayatollah? Some of them, absolutely, yeah. But then again, who keeps voting for the right-wingers to become president in that country? It's the people from out in the countryside who are much more religious and much more conservative, just like everywhere else. So, nobody thinks that the liberals in the big cities in America represent everybody else. And we shouldn't think the same thing about Iran. So you can have, just like with the big moment of pulling down Saddam Hussein's statue. Yes, some people are very pleased. And what about the people who are now losing out? And what's to happen to them? And, I don't really know who the new Ayatollah is going to be. I guess they're saying there's already an interim Ayatollah. But then, and I'm sorry.
And he's dead, isn't he?
Talking about for really 20 years. But then obviously, like in just the lead up to this whole conversation since Venezuela and the current threat of regime change, that if you kill the next Ayatollah too,
right,
then they're just going to name another Shiite cleric to be the Ayatollah. And if you kill him too, then they're just going to name another one. You're not going to be able to convince them to say, and look, I'm not the world's greatest expert on Islam, but I know that Shiite Islam especially has an entire vein, much like Israeli Judaism, this massive vein of victimhood and martyrdom, where, in our culture, Ben, we say, oh, stop being such a martyr, right? If you like complain that something bad happened to you or whatever, right? Or if someone could be a martyr if something, they are killed in a way, killed violently by a cop, and they become a martyr in that way, in a less cynical kind of fashion. But we don't venerate the idea of getting killed. We definitely want to get killed. We might want to fight for something right, but we definitely want to die fighting for something right. That's not the way we look at it. That is the way they look at it. And we would be very ill-advised. Well, it's already too late. They already killed the dang supreme leader. Yeah. So how they're going to respond to that, I'll tell you what, this is a very bright spot so far, but keep your eye on this, everyone, is the highest ranking religious authority in Shiite Islam is the Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani, who is an Iranian, but who lives in Najaf, Iraq. And he was really in charge during that whole Iraq War too. Anyway, I'll skip the details, but he is extremely influential. And he issued a statement saying he hopes that Allah is merciful to the Ayatollah when he gets there and all of that stuff. But he did not order a Shiite holy war against us. But he could, Ben. And he is the guy who told W. Bush, here's those details. He's the guy who told W. Bush in 2004, in the beginning of 2004, almost a year into the war, he said, I want one man, one vote. Or you're going to have to start this war all over again, boy. And W. Bush bowed down and essentially was enslaved by him and fought the rest of the war for the Ayatollah Sistani and his sock puppets, the Dawa Party and Supreme Islamic Council. That's who America fought the war for, because Sistani, all he had to do was say, and he did. He said, when I paraphrased him saying that to Bush, he didn't say it to Bush. What he did was he said, if you believe in God, I want you to go outside and tell Bush you want one man, one vote. So then every single Shiite in the country went outside and told Bush, we want one man, one vote. And that was it. I mean, so, and he's the guy when Obama built the caliphate, as you covered in real time so well at the time, it was the Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani who said, if you believe in God, I want you to go and fight against the bin Ladenite caliphate, right? This is the other side, the Shiite side. And he's the one who called up all the Shiite militias to go and fight the caliphate. American planes in the sky, Iranian Quds Force leading the Shiite militia, Iraqi militias on the ground against Baghdadi and ISIS starting, in 2014 through 18 there. And so that's who he is. He's the most powerful guy in the world. He could snap his fingers and it would be like the death mark on Salman Rushdie on everyone. And that's, I don't know how many Shiite Muslims there are in the world. They're about half of the Muslims in the Middle East. They're a minority in the world, but there are still tens of millions of Shiites. And I don't know how many spread throughout Europe. We saw already a blowback terrorist attack in Austin, Texas, in my hometown last night. A guy night before last, a guy went and took a rifle down to 6th Street, the big, tourist attraction where everybody goes and gets drunk. The college kids go and drink and dance and whatever, and went and shot up a bar and killed 3 people and wounded a bunch more before the cops got him. And luckily there were a bunch of cops standing right there and got him. But anyone can reach out and touch soft targets like that. And this country is full of who knows who the Democrats especially have led into this country over the last, especially the last, 4 years of the Biden administration, but even going back this whole century, Um,
Yeah.
This is not like the Bin Ladenites, man. Where the Bin Ladenites, as everyone knows in your audience, I'm sure, that this is America and Britain and Saudi Arabia's pet little suicide bombers, right?
Right,
Bin
right.
Laden and his guys. And yes, they do blow back against us sometimes out of control. Um, I'm not a full truther like I know a lot of people are, but you got to understand, Bin Laden had no real religious authority. He just had respect because he'd been shot in battle and he slept on the floor of the cave with the boys. And even though he had money and stuff, so he had respect, but he did not have religious rank like an Ayatollah where he can command millions of people into action. You know, think about Baghdadi, the leader of the caliphate. He said, all good Muslims come to Iraq and join the caliphate. And like 75,000 people showed up, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's not the same. The Ayatollah decides to declare war, man. Seriously,
So,
man.
so let me ask you this then. Based on that, so it feels like Trump is trying to find an off-ramp because the administration, it seems like they thought they were going to kill the Ayatollah. They were going to back out. This thing was be over in a couple of days, similar to the Maduro situation, right? And then they're going to say, look, no U.S. soldiers got killed, and look what a brilliant strategy this was. Obviously, as of right now, there are at least 6 U.S. service members who have died as a result of missile attacks. That number may continue to climb because we know that the Iranians are continuing to fire large numbers of missiles. And that doesn't look like it's going to stop anytime soon. Also, we also know that the U.S. is running low on interceptor missiles, and that looks like their supply of those could run out within 10 days, at least be severely depleted within 10 days. So it feels like Trump's trying to find an off-ramp. How do you do that at this point when you have an Iranian response that's continuing? There's reporting that Trump had tried through the Italians immediately after Khomeini was killed to send a message to say, let's call for a ceasefire and negotiate. And the Iranians said, no, absolutely not. We're done negotiating with you. And so it's interesting to kind of see what's happening. I'm curious as to, does the Trump administration appeal to someone like this cleric you're talking about? Is that the route you go and you say, hey, we want you to take over and let's find peace? Do they continue to push to try to install their own person? Because it feels like that has no chance of happening. And then also I want to ask you about troops on the ground, boots on the ground, because the administration said over and over and over that will never happen. And then today Trump says, I never said that would never happen. Maybe it will happen. I say I wouldn't like to do that, but I'll do whatever I have to do. I mean, the idea that they might actually put U.S. troops on the ground in Iran seems totally insane to me. And yet, I'm surprised we're sitting here having the conversation to the depth that we are right now about how this thing is breaking down.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, if he dumps the 82nd Airborne in there, I mean, I'm sure they must be counseling him that that would be a bad idea. I mean, he remembers Eagle Claw. He brought up Operation Eagle Claw, the failed rescue mission of the late Carter years, I guess it was in late 79, yep. Was it in early 1980, the failed rescue mission to get the hostages out of there, and what a disaster that was for Carter and all that. I mean, it's not beyond the realm of possibility, but in all of the talk of war with Iran over the last 20, 25 years, nobody seriously talked about putting guys on the ground there other than potentially like special operations forces with laser designators. But I've been informed, but they don't really need laser designators for their smart bombs anymore. But that's, Bush era tech. And so that's no longer really an issue. But if they were going to try to occupy the downtown government buildings in Tehran or something, yeah. I mean, it'd be absolutely biting off way more than they could chew. And trying to drive tanks to Tehran from the borders, from somewhere, I don't know, Azerbaijan? Right. I don't think so. Yeah. So I don't know really what he has in mind there. As far as how to ramp the thing down, I mean, the only realistic thing I could think of, which is not realistic at all, in terms of politics, but in terms of actually achieving the result, as you outlined the question, would be to just quit, to say, you know what, we got what we wanted already. We're declaring victory, and we're turning this off as best as we can. Fire nothing but defensive missiles, and try to tell them, okay, time out or whatever as best they can. But I don't know, man, it may be way too late for that. I mean, it could be, see, it's funny, man. Like, I don't know. I really am not a military expert enough, and I'm not plugged into the very latest developments in terms of which strikes are happening where on the ground.
Sure.
But it seems like maybe the Iranians are not hitting with everything they've got. They're not, as far as I know, they're not attempting to target the U.S. Navy out at sea. But at the same time, it really is, man. Just like in what I always warned was the worst case scenario, other than the casualties, it seems like they're hitting specific radar stations and maybe even some symbolic military targets, more or less. But it's not like they're trying to like carpet bomb the barracks and kill every guy in Kuwait, Bahrain, and Qatar. Thank goodness it's not like that. But they have hit bases in Iraqi Kurdistan, in Kuwait, in Bahrain, in Qatar, in Saudi, in UAE, and in Oman. They've hit oil rigs. They hit one oil tanker going through the Straits of Hormuz. That was all that took to shut down all that traffic. I mean, it's just like me and every anti-war guy warned, not just me, a lot of people have warned literally 20, 25 years that this is what could happen. As you introduced the segment, that Iran is not Iraq. Iraq had through the Iran-Iraq War, then we beat them up in Iraq War I, then we kept beating them up all through the 1990s, and they were as softened up as could be by 2003. Iran has not been at war since 1989 and the end of the Iran-Iraq War. And that doesn't mean that they're a juggernaut, but they're not anything like helpless Saddam Hussein's situation back then.
But the technology is also so different than it was. You alluded to Bush-era technology, right? But the reality is, in the last 23 years, I think the Ukraine-Russia war has shown us is the advent of drone technology on the battlefield. It's completely changing the game. It's changing everything, right? We saw over the weekend these Iranian drones cost like 30 grand to build one, and one of them takes out a $300 million U.S. radar system in Bahrain. $300 million to a $30,000 drone. And I saw a chart that somebody put out today, and it was actually just fascinating. Because of how cheap they are, how many drones the Iranians can produce in a month, and the number somewhere around 300 a month versus how many interceptors at a price of anywhere from $1 million to $4 million the U.S. can produce, and the U.S. can produce about 100 interceptors a month. But that's $4 million an interceptor versus $30,000 for 300 drones. So if it's a numbers game, like that game doesn't work at all. And obviously, the only thing that leads you to is ratcheting up the kinds of weapons you're using. Because at some point, you get tired of being hit by drones, and you say, well, then we got to hit them with something bigger. And that obviously opens a whole can of worms. Do the Israelis use a nuke? I saw today that Kim Jong-un in North Korea offered nukes to Iran and said, if you want nukes, I'll send you some. I mean, come on, what are we doing here, guys? The whole point of electing Trump was to not have World War III, and it feels like we're standing not just on the edge of it, it's like it's starting, and you got to walk this freaking thing back. But I want to ask you something else, Scott, too, about Israel. So Tucker Carlson had said last week that he was hearing that the reason that Trump was going to go ahead and strike Iran was because the Israelis were telling the administration they were going to do it, with him or without him, and they might use a nuke. And if they used a nuke, Trump was afraid of that happening, and so he was kind of getting drawn into this. Everyone called that crazy, and you're just a Jew hater, and you hate Israel. I want to play the sound. We had the sound from Marco Rubio, I think, from just a few minutes ago. This came out maybe an hour ago. But let's play that, because this is Marco Rubio, and he's basically confirming that. Listen to what he says.
There absolutely was an imminent threat, and the imminent threat was that we knew that if Iran was attacked, and we believed they would be attacked, that they would immediately come after us. And we were not going to sit there and absorb a blow before we responded, because the Department of War assessed that if we did that, if we waited for them to hit us first after they were attacked, and by someone else, Israel attacked them, they hit us first, and we waited for them to hit us, we would suffer more casualties and more deaths. We went proactively in a defensive way to prevent them from inflicting higher damage. Had we not done so, there would have been hearings on Capitol Hill about how we knew that this was going to happen, and we didn't act preemptively to prevent more casualties and more loss of life.
Proactive war. I like that. That's a good one.
Unbelievable, right? Like what
And by
he
the way,
just
so
said.
Mike
There's
Johnson,
Go
Mike
ahead.
Johnson said the same thing, Ben.
Yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, Mike Johnson also gave a statement this afternoon. Apparently, I just saw on Twitter right before we went on, essentially confirming the same thing. And I guess saying that he had been briefed that as well, that they were afraid that Israel was going to start the war without them and sort of drag them in. They thought it'd be better to go ahead and go with them, which is such a weird signal of helplessness. It has always been this, at least this whole century, and going back before too, I guess. But just so strange the way the tail wags the dog here, and Israel, the client state, gets the empire to do all its dirty work when it's supposed to be the other way around. If it's supposed to be anything at all.
But the way they're describing it is a hostage situation. It's like, listen, there is an imminent threat. Okay, what was the imminent threat? Well, the imminent threat was Israel said, we're going to attack them. And we knew that if they got attacked, they were going to hit us. And so the imminent threat to us isn't Iran. That means the imminent threat is Israel. The imminent threat is that the Israelis are saying, we're going to go in there and start a war, and we're going to pull you along. And the way to get out of that, in my humble opinion, and I'm not a politician and I'm not a president, but in my opinion, the way you get out of that is that you go on television, Mr. President, and you don't say to the people, we're going to attack Iran and we're going to get rid of this murderous regime. You go on television and you say, tonight, the Israelis are telling me that they're going to hit Iran. And we're not going to back them up if they do, because we're trying to bring diplomacy and they're trying to force us into a war. And if you say that, the American people are like, got it. Now, some people may like that and some people may hate it, but at least they understand what it is. And instead, what we have is this 3 days of nonsense about there was an imminent threat. They were going to hit us. They were going to attack us. We got to protect the lives of the American people. And then it turns out, oh, no, actually, it's just because the Israelis forced us to do it, and you get called a Jew hater and an anti-Semite for even bringing up the fact that Israel's dragging the U.S. into this war, and they literally did. They dragged us into this thing, and so...
You know what, though?
Go ahead.
Here's the thing,
Yeah.
not to detract from that point, because they sure as hell did,
Yeah.
but let us not deny the agency of the supreme leader of the planet Earth, Emperor Trump. He is the one sitting in that chair behind that desk who calls these shots, and he does not have to do these things any more than Obama or Biden or Trump or W. Bush had to do these things that they've done that they did not have to do. And so, you know, clearly this is at Israel's behest and all of that. I'm a bit skeptical about the nuclear blackmail and all of that. I think it's too easy to imagine Trump saying, no, shut up. You are not going to use nukes. And I'm the superpower around here, not you. And so we'll go this far, but not that far and whatever. I don't imagine him really bowing down that bad. But I think the point being that Trump wanted to do this anyway. He doesn't care. You know what I mean? People act like, and I understand there's a lot of wish fulfillment here. Do we need Ron Paul? We needed him so bad. But Donald Trump ain't that. He's a rogue in his way, but really what he is he's Rudy Giuliani, right? The guy that Ron Paul destroyed for being the ignorant war hawk that just, you know, strutted around acting tough without really knowing anything about it, without having a good idea what the consequences of the things he's saying. And which, by the way, Rudy Giuliani right now, who is Donald Trump's very good friend and lawyer and everything, is a paid hack for the Mujahideen cult, communist terrorist cult, who goes around saying, yeah, you're dang right, we need regime change in Iran so we can install this insane cult led by this guy who's been dead for 30 years, but the wife won't admit it. And she runs this crazy cult where they kidnap all the children away to blackmail the families. You have to raise your hand for permission to speak. And it's this insane Heaven's Gate style mind control, you know. They're known also as the National Council for Resistance in Iran and put out, you know, anti-regime propaganda all the time. And that's who, you know, Giuliani it takes a check from. That's the kind of advice that Donald Trump is getting. You know, he never was, you know, he ain't Hillary Clinton. But other than that, he is Hillary Clinton, you know?
Well, I was going to say, at this point, what's the difference? And I know there are going to be people who get enraged to even say that, right? But Trump ran 3 times and became president the first time only because, I truly believe, only because he was the only one who was willing to stand up on a stage and call off the Iraq war and say it was a disaster. At the time that he did that in 2016, no one else would dare utter those phrases. They would never attack Jeb Bush and say, your brother dragged us into this war and it was an utter failure. People have been replaying the clips of him destroying Jeb Bush on stage over the Iraq war. But even as recently as this last election, I keep seeing the clip running on X all the time now of Trump saying, with me, you won't get a war with Iran. With Kamala, you will get a war with Iran. And have you seen the NBC show Traitors? Okay, so it's some silly like reality show. It's called Traitors, and at the very end, someone's supposed to do it. Anyways, I only know about it because I keep seeing this clip of it. I guess the final episode aired, and this guy's standing there, and he says, I am the traitor. And the woman's so stunned. She couldn't believe it. She'd been with him this whole time, and I guess the entire series. But they've put Trump's face on the guy, and they put MAGA on this woman because it's like, that's what I'm seeing, right? And the people who follow me for a long time, people who are heavily libertarian or MAGA or America First, are stunned. So many of them just saying, how could we get it so wrong? Like he had us. We really thought that this guy was with us. And how can he not see in the primary, if we wanted this war, we would have voted for Nikki Haley. We would have voted for anybody else who was running against him, right? And that we would have done that in 3 cycles. We would have voted that way. And the American people overwhelmingly voted to not have this. And that's why the polling shows only 27% of the people support this, which is, go back to the Iraq War, 55% on Iraq War II, 90% on the Afghanistan War. Like, this thing's over. Trump is such a smart person in terms of calculating, I think, the public and image. How could you get it this wrong?
You know what, though? Here's the thing, man. As you well know, is the background to so much of American politics. It's the Israel lobby. There's so much money and power there. And, right now, I don't pay nearly as much attention to Democratic politics as I should, just, for the curiosity's sake of it all and everything. But like, you have a huge crack up on the left where it is the owners and controllers of the Democratic Party versus the entire voting population of the Democratic Party on the issue of Israel-Palestine, which is a huge issue. I mean, when it comes to genocide, you got, Fetterman up there is no different than Rubio. And then you have the Democrat voters who are absolutely in an uproar about it. And it's more and more that case on the right, where if you look at support for Zionism and support for these policies on the right, it's the support skews older, and the younger and younger people are just totally against it and not buying into this stuff. It's people who are kind of stuck on these old narratives, who are essentially falling for it. But I have to say that, again, there's so much wish fulfillment there because we need someone to stop the empire, right? Ever since, let's just say ever since the end of the Cold War, we've just had the most irresponsible leadership in this country, man, that did all of these things that they shouldn't have to do, led by blowing something like $20 trillion on empire building when we could have just not done that. We didn't have to do this project at all. They basically ruined everything. And oh man, I hope I find my train of thought. It's in there somewhere. About the massive loss of support on the right. But I'm sorry, about Trump, which is if you put aside your need to believe that the guy who is against the left is a good guy that you can really support, not just he's better than them,
right?
But like you want to believe in him, then you might miss it. But if you're critical at all, then you would have noticed that in his first term, he was completely pwned by Israel. Yeah. And Sheldon and Miriam Adelson paid him hundreds of millions of dollars in his first 2 campaigns. And in his first term, he bent over backwards to please the Israelis, including tearing up the nuclear deal with Iran and replacing it with only, a sanctions war that was the lead up to this. He completely fatuously, is that the word for it? Recognized Israel's seizure of the Golan Heights after a 4-minute long lecture by the ambassador David Friedman about Israel stole it and we like them and they can have it if they want it, right? And so he goes, yeah, okay, I hereby recognize Israel's seizure of the Golan Heights. And then he did these ridiculous Abraham Accords where the the policy for basically the Sunni kingdoms of the Gulf states was that they would be friendly with Israel. Of course, there's no war going on or anything, but they would never fully normalize relations with Israel until the Palestinians got a deal, either a state of their own or, citizenship in a single state solution or however. But once they're okay, then they'll normalize relations. Well, in Trump's first term, Jared Kushner came in and said, well, what's your price? Right. And they said, well, okay, well, let's see. And so what he did was he bought, with American taxpayer money, he gave F-15s, or pardon me, F-16s, I guess it was, to Bahrain, gave F-35s to the UAE, debt forgiveness to North Sudan, what's left of Sudan after America broke off the south of it, and recognized completely illegally, for whatever it's worth, Morocco's seizure of the northern half of the country of Western Sahara. And in exchange for these bribes, these countries then normalized relations with Israel over the Palestinians' dead bodies. See? And then this was what culminated in Netanyahu's big speech at the United Nations in September of 2022, right just 2 weeks before October 7th, where he declared, I win, you lose. I've normalized relations with all of the Gulf states, but I didn't have to give you suckers nothing. So you'll get no citizenship, you'll get no independence, you just live like slaves in your concentration camps until you die. And he mocked Shimon Peres and said, it's a new Middle East. But Shimon Peres was trying to follow up Yitzhak Rabin's idea of building a pseudo sort of two-state solution, at least something like a two-state solution, and said, if we compromise with the Palestinians, then we can have normal relations with the Arab states. And Netanyahu said, no, it's the new Middle East. I win. The Netanyahu doctrine is we get to normalize relations with all these countries and the Palestinians get nothing. And then that was what spurred Hamas, of course, to do the October 7th attack, was to make sure to disrupt that process, because they were trying to get Saudi Arabia to sign the next one. So this is October 7th was literally the direct consequence of Donald Trump's lapdoghood and service to Netanyahu in his first term. He also moved the embassy to Jerusalem, which sounds like, oh, who cares what city an embassy is in, except that Jerusalem is supposed to be an international city, not just owned by Israeli Jews, but there are Christian and Islamic sites there and Islamic private property there, and especially in Eastern Jerusalem. And there's, of course, the Al-Aqsa Mosque and all of that. And if there was ever going to be a Palestinian state, the Palestinians were supposed to have East Jerusalem as the capital of their Palestinian state. But the Israeli lobby tried very hard, got all of Congress, and they finally got an American president, Donald Trump, in his first term, to recognize, to not just move the embassy there, but to recognize then Jerusalem as the united and eternal capital of Israel, meaning the Israeli Jews own the entire thing. The Palestinians in East Jerusalem gotta go, and they'll never be able to have East Jerusalem for the capital of the state that they'll never have. Yeah. And so it was really like the most Zionist president that we've ever had. And then, so did that indicate toward an aggressive war against Iran? Sure, it did.
Okay, fair enough. I think that's a that's a fair point to make. Moving forward, you've been generous with your time, and so moving forward, I want to get your thoughts on a couple of things. Again, who knows what will happen with this war? But do you believe there is a scenario in which, when it's over, Iran can inflict enough damage on the Israelis and on U.S. bases that it becomes ultimately a stalemate, it ends, and we end up basically where we were before, just a lot of bombs have been dropped, a lot of missiles have been fired, but Iran's basically the same with different leadership now, but really not different, kind of the same leadership, just different people in those positions. And then Israel and the U.S. continue doing what they're doing. Is that where we go, or is it a different outcome? How do you see it?
You know, that's a great way to frame it. I mean, I guess I would say that there are, strong probabilities toward that outcome that you're saying there. I can't say that I have like a better idea. I'm much less good at predicting the near-term future as I am telling you what already happened before.
Yeah.
But yes, I think that's basically right. That short of dropping, I don't want to encourage anybody, but short of absolutely, catastrophic destruction of that country, uh, where nobody survives in the capital city or that kind of thing, then no, I think the Shiite clerical regime will continue to rule over what is a very flawed republic. They do have something like a bicameral legislature over there and everything, by the way. It's not just a one-man dictatorship. It is a very flawed republic, but hey, Ben, look who's talking.
Yeah, right.
But so I think, yes, I think that is probably what will be the outcome. What it becomes a very interesting question about the future of their nuclear program, because on one hand, it is true that America and Israel really set their nuclear program back in the war last June. And the Natanz and Fordo facilities and the Isfahan conversion facility have been completely shuttered since then. There's been some reports of some trying to develop a tunnel system somewhere, but they're in the first stages. They got nowhere to enrich anything. They have no conversion facility. I mean, they really did get, you could say, obliterated, right? But they have mastered the fuel cycle, and they do have their own domestic uranium supply. They could withdraw from the Non-Proliferation Treaty and start making news. Israel and America just murdered the Ayatollah who said that God said that it's forbidden to make weapons of mass destruction. And so whether the Ayatollah agrees about God's opinion about that remains to be seen. I think, anyone can tell you, honestly, I've heard friends and friends' dads in armchairs say that, when you go after helpless Saddam and you go after helpless Gaddafi, and Iran builds like kind of a latent deterrent, kind of a half deterrent, and then you smash them. But Kim Jong-il or Kim Jong-il's son, Kim Jong-un, is sitting on the high seat there in North Korea still. There's really kind of only one lesson from that, which is that Saddam and Gaddafi and Khamenei should have got nuclear bombs. And that would have kept America from invading and destroying their countries. And so it's obvious, if you think your nation state might fall out of favor with America, that you better get to enriching uranium right now, or harvesting some plutonium out of the reactors you're already running, or whatever it is. And I think there's a very good chance that this could lead to the end of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, quite frankly. I mean, here they have a safeguarded and at this point completely dormant nuclear program, civilian nuclear program. They're offering a deal way better, way, way sweeter than what Obama got in 2015, including having zero stockpile and enriching only up to 1.5%. And then we bomb them anyway. So the Non-Proliferation Treaty and a non-nuclear weapons states' adherence to it apparently is not a protection of getting a proactive war in the name of destroying your nuclear program and, or I guess the rest of you. And so what good's a treaty in a situation like that? I don't know what else is going to happen, but I think, what? I saw the Saudis too saying, like, they won't take our calls. We're asking for more defensive missiles and they're ignoring us. Like, yeah, look who loves you. You know what I mean? We're happy to get you into all kinds of trouble. Bahrain and Oman and Qatar and UAE and Saudi and Kuwait and Iraq. But no, sorry. Actually, they even moved interceptors out of UAE to Israel. Hey, no hard feelings though, guys. I'm sure they'll forget about that. I'm sure they'll all be, very solid in America's, military hegemony in the Middle East from now on. They'll all be as loyal servants of the empire as ever after this, right?
Yeah, exactly. I saw the soundbite from the Saudi spokesperson who said they were totally betrayed. He says, the U.S. betrayed us. They knew we were being attacked. They knew we were being hit, and they moved everything to Israel and spent all the time and energy trying to protect Israel. Okay, so I told you only a couple. One more for you, because you do look back. You do look back, and looking back on the Vietnam War and the impact that had on Democrats in terms of future elections, If you look at the Iraq War too gave us Barack Obama, right? And so, and I believe, by the way, that the Ukraine war gave us Trump's current term. Not that Trump wasn't popular, but I think there was the thing that put Trump over the top in 2024, I still believe strongly, was a coalition of independents, libertarians, and then, of course, his supporters together, and especially those Gen X voters who turned out, thanks to a guy named Charlie Kirk, who also was very against this war. And by the way, just a commercial, how gross was it to see the guys on the new Charlie Kirk show over the weekend saying how Charlie Kirk would have supported this war? He would have been privately angry, but he would have understood, and I'm like, guys, what is this? I mean, it's total craziness. But how do you see what's just happened in terms of, obviously MAGA as a movement is dead. Like if it wasn't before, you've driven the final stake through its heart, because coalitions cannot be rebuilt when you have betrayed the coalition. Certainly, you make a good point when you say if you're paying attention to Trump the first time, maybe you wouldn't have believed it. Okay, but the coalition that was here was like, we're going to give you a shot because we think you're our only shot at avoiding something like this. And then he's the one who does it. So obviously midterms, I think Republicans lose, but moving into the 2028 elections, does anybody in this administration even have a shot of winning the presidency? And that includes, by the way, Tulsi Gabbard, who hasn't said a word about Iran, used to sell T-shirts that said, no war with Iran. And it's like, where are you, Tulsi?
Yeah, man, I'll tell you what, like we're talking about, more and more on the right, it's a huge divide between the people who own the party, right? Mm-hmm. The people Donald Trump's thinking about, and the voters and the supporters out in the country. And Zionism is the dividing line. And that's what it's all about. It's either America first or it's Israel instead, but you can't have it both ways. And, so yeah, and people should take it hard. Donald Trump didn't just say, well, we should have a humble foreign policy or something like W. Bush. He said, I'm the greatest peacemaker in the history of the world. And then to turn around and people did believe that. People forgot about all those little details about moving the embassy to Jerusalem. They don't understand all that stuff. He said, we're going to not do this. And then he did it in a read my lips, no new wars kind of way. And they should feel very betrayed. And especially that it's so clearly on behalf of a foreign power. And so, and by the way, in your list there, you forgot how he beat Hillary in 2016. She was running on a no-fly zone over Syria. We should fight Russian to protect al-Qaeda on the ground in Syria, she said. And he said, I think we should not do that. Mm-hmm. And then he destroyed her in that election, even though she called him a Russian spy and all that. So you're right. I mean, as Ron Paul says, the president who promises peace always wins. And in fact, in our recent era, the only president who ran on being a hawk and won was Biden, and he probably stole that. But the rest of them all say anti-war stuff to get elected, always. Mm-hmm. So then the problem, though, for the Democrat side here is who did they have that they could possibly put up as someone credible to criticize what Trump is doing here? Mm-hmm. I don't think that they can really make much hay out of this. They're known as such hawks and such idiots and such hypocrites. If only, Trump would fly the right colored flag over there, they would be all for it. And in fact, a lot of liberals are for it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That's how they prove they're not leftist anti-American communists, is by being good war hawks, right? Liberal. And so I do not foresee a great Democrat champion of peace exploiting this in the way, for example, Barack Obama was able to cynically exploit that sentiment in 2008. I don't know of any Democrat who's a credible leader along those lines at all. You do have a couple on the Republican right, including Margaret Taylor Greene and Thomas Massie. Mm-hmm. And I don't know as much about her, but I know he's sincere. He's a Ron Paul guy from the Revolution of 2008. Yep. And he was elected first time in 2010 as, a full Ron Paul guy. So, and he's been really getting better and better on all this stuff over the last few years. I think he was always good on foreign policy, but he's never emphasized this much. But now he's, they picked a fight with him and now they're regretting it. So I think, but as far as like the midterms and overall Republican Democrat politics, yes, it would make sense for the Democrats to gain at Republican expense for this. And, for all those Republicans out there in Twitter land who are still saying, hey, trust me, bro, you got to wait. There's still a chance for this thing to be fantastic. No, on the first day, they already hit all American bases up and down the Gulf, hit oil platforms, hit all trillion-dollar, economic targets, hit oil refineries now, show they can reach out and touch Cyprus, and people in Israel, kill people in, all up and down the Gulf. And this is only the start of the thing. So the idea that like, no, man, just wait, this might turn out just like Venezuela, which was so simple and easy, has already proven completely false. People need to snap out of that. This is, again, I don't know exactly how to judge it on the sliding scale. I don't know how many missiles they have or how rapidly they can fire them or how rapidly they are firing them compared to how rapidly they could be firing them and how desperately they're trying to kill people and exactly the ratio of the missiles being shot down and all that. I'm really not the expert on that. So it's hard for me to judge. It doesn't look to me like they're given everything they have, but it looks like they're showing the range of what they could destroy. And by, marking these spots with massive explosions already. And I just think this thing is already, the Wall Street Journal and there's New York Times, was it New York Times? I think it's the Wall Street Journal has the thing. People at the Pentagon are panicking. As you said in one of your earlier questions, they're running out of interceptors. Everybody knows. We talked about this for years, man. Donald Trump don't watch my show. Listen to my show? Is like, they have more missiles than we have interceptors.
Yeah.
So at some point,
it's a math problem.
We run out, they don't. And then what?
Yeah, it's a math problem. But I agree with you.
Potentially a very bad one. What if we had this conversation in a week, Ben, and we ran out of missiles and out of Sparrows or Patriots and whatever, and they are still firing and firing and firing, and we got nothing left to shoot them down but Gatling guns and things, man.
Well, the danger of that, as I mentioned, and that's how we started it, is so then you have to move the war into a new phase, right? Where it's like, well, we can't intercept. So to your point, maybe we just have to drop something huge on Tehran and devastate them. And that becomes, again, absolute worst case scenario. And I certainly hope that's not where it goes. And also, I would agree with you. At this point, the Iranians do not seem to be firing most of what they have, or even their strongest stuff. The hypersonic missiles, they're not really using those at this point. But maybe it's because they're fighting against two nuclear powers, and they recognize that it's going to require a certain amount of carefulness on their end because they don't want to take it to that place. Scott Horton, I'll give you the last word here. Go ahead.
Yeah, just on that point there is they just killed the actually quite conservative Ayatollah, and by conservative I mean not rash. Yeah. He was probably the most restrained guy you would imagine, without knowing all their names. That the ruling council of guys younger than him are probably to the right of him and more anxious than him. He was 88 or 89 years old or something when they killed him, right? So he's by definition a slower and more patient guy at that time. And I think, probably Iranian restraint over the last couple of decades is greatly in part due to his influence. Not that he didn't exploit George W. Bush, giving him Baghdad on a silver platter. Of course he did, but how could he possibly resisted that? But I think we may very well regret that the new leadership is more hawkish than him and much more dangerous than him, much more unwilling to compromise.
Well, again, you said you like to look back. There's not a single example for anybody who's watching who says, you guys don't get it, you don't understand, we had to take him out. I defy you to give me one example in this last 30 years where this has worked, where we go in and we destabilize and we kill the leadership and it gets replaced with somebody who's terrific and loves democracy and makes a better life for their people. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah, and even the color revolutions too, right? Yep. Sometimes it's just a coup d'etat. Sometimes it's a phony protest movement or some kind of putsch. It's not always a full-scale invasion, but those all fail too. Go down the list from Serbia and Croatia and Georgia, Ukraine, Kyrgyzstan. All of those blew up in their face over and over again.
Well, look at what we just did to Ukraine, right? The color revolution, 12 years ago, has led to a war that we pushed with the puppet Zelensky and wouldn't let him get out of when he tried to early on in the early days of that war, and has resulted in losing an entire generation of men in Ukraine, orphans all over the country, 30 million people displaced. It's mind-boggling. But we sit over here and we have our Starbucks and we say, well, you know, that's war. War's terrible. War's hell. And we don't recognize what we're doing.
Yeah, you know what? The last 7 times we did this, the last 10, they were so bad, Ben, that this one can't possibly be as bad as those. So let's go ahead and try it one more time. I saw George Will. I didn't know George Will had a Twitter account. George Will said, now we are redeemed. Now, finally, after losing all of our credibility, now we're getting it back. Yeah, losing all our credibility because of all of the wars that George Will has supported for the last 40 years.
Yeah. Well, you said you didn't know he had a Twitter account. I didn't know he was still even alive. So I guess
no, I didn't
congratulations to George Will on surviving to see your golden moment of another Middle East war. Scott Horton, it's great to have you on, my friend. Thank you so much. Tell people where to find you. If you're not looking for Scott now, you should be where? Tell me, Scott.
Go to ScottHortonAcademy.com. Check it out on my awesome sweatshirt here. That's where I teach you all of the stuff that I learned over the last 30 years of doing this. ScottHortonAcademy.com.
Awesome. Scott, thanks so much.
Absolutely.
Guys, thanks for watching. Appreciate you tuning in for the live stream. Of course, we'll cut it up. We'll share it across social media, and then we ask that you do the same. When you see it, repost it, get it out to people, help them to be better informed, better educated by watching this stuff. See you next time.